Welcome to another Rockler demo. Today I'm going to show you a new and innovative router jig that we just came out with. This is the Indexing Dado Jig, and what it allows you to do is cut multiple dados that are equally spaced apart without having to move your straight edge. This speeds up your work and eliminates the potential for errors caused by misplacing the straight edge. You can adjust the spacing between the dados from 1/8 inch to 6 9/16 inch, depending on the diameter bit you're using. I'll get into the bit selection and spacing details when I use the jig. Today we'll do a quick unboxing just so you can see what's included, and then I'll show you how it works. So let's start by checking out what's inside the box. Okay, we've got the router base plate that replaces the base plate on your router, the jig base, which is made of MDF with high pressure laminate surface on both sides, similar to many of our jigs, and a couple packs of screws to fit most routers and the knobs for adjusting the jig. Now it's important to note that this jig works with 1/8 inch diameter router bits and 1/4 inch to 3/4 inch diameter router bits, but it doesn't work with 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch diameter router bits, such as a 3/16 inch diameter router bit, because the adjustable fence rails can only close down to a 1/4 inch wide dado thickness. You can jump down to an 1/8 inch wide dado if you remove the adjustable rail, because the fixed rail fits in an 1/8 inch wide dado. So let's get on with it and see it in action. In this case, I'm going to cut a 1/2 inch wide dado that's a 1/4 inch deep and space them 5 inches apart. So I've installed a 1/2 inch diameter straight bit. Next, I set up the 5 inch spacing that I want between the dados. I do that by lining up the 1/2 inch indicator with the 5 inch scale mark on the jig. Next, I set the bit depth to a 1/4 inch. Now we're ready to test the setup on this scrap workpiece. I'm going to set up some dust collection because this is MDF, and as you might know, it's tremendously dusty. So let me get that set up and we'll start making our test cuts. I position the fence on the edge of the workpiece, start the router, and cut the dado, maintaining steady pressure against the workpiece. Now I'll measure the distance from the edge to the edge of the dado test cut, and it should be 5 inches. And it is. Now if this weren't 5 inches, I would need to go back and check my jig setup for errors and make corrections to get it at 5 inches. Now I'll spin around the jig and put the rail into the dado, letting the router bit hang off the edge. I need to adjust the fence so the width of it matches the width of the dado. I hold the fixed fence rail against the near shoulder of the dado and slide the adjustable rail until it is snug against the opposite shoulder. I want it snug, but not so snug that the jig won't slide. It's this adjustable fence that keeps the jig tracking perfectly parallel to the previous dados that you've cut. Now I'll make a second test cut, but this time the jig's fence will ride in the first test cut dado to make sure the spacing is in fact correct. There we go, and we'll check the measurement one more time, and yep, exactly 5 inches, so I'm all set. Now if this were a real project, I'd move on to working on the actual work pieces, but this is just a demo, so we'll stop it there. I've got to tell you, this rigged up dust collection system I came up with works surprisingly well. I just clamped the hose directly in line behind the dado, and most of the dust shot straight to it. Just make sure it's low enough that it doesn't interfere with the jig. So now I'd like to finish with a handful more tips that will help you whenever you're cutting dados. First, this jig is designed to cut dados that are equally spaced apart, but you can cut different spacing between the dados. You just need to reset the jig and test it before you make the next cut. For example, the middle dividers on this cubby cabinet are spaced 5 inches apart, but the two end dividers are 6 inches from the sides to keep the openings consistent when the face frames are added. So the way I did that was to first set the jig to 6 inch spacing, cut the first dado, then I reset the jig for a 5 inch spacing, and cut the remaining dados. Second, some materials can be prone to blowing out or splintering as the router bit exits the cut. This isn't a problem with MDF, but it can be a problem with woods like oak or cedar. A good way to prevent this blowout from happening is to clamp a backer board to the back edge of the cut on the workpiece and cut into that backer board. The backer supports the edge wood fibers and leaves a crisp, clean cut on the edge. Just remember, if you're using this jig, cut all the way through the backer board so that the fence can ride in the dado during the next cut. Finally, when it comes to choosing a router bit for cutting dados, you obviously want a straight bit. Fluted straight bits work well, but make sure it's sharp and clean. And spiral bits work particularly well for cutting dados. And if you're going to be fitting plywood into the dado, be aware that the thickness of the plywood is typically a little bit less than the stated thickness. So a 3/4 inch piece of plywood may actually be 11/16 inch thick. So using a 3/4 inch bit might make a dado a bit too wide. A great solution for this problem is to use one of our undersized router bits. These bits are slightly smaller than the stated nominal size, so they create a dado that's just right for plywood. Well, I hope you found this demo and these tips to be helpful. And if you've got a project coming up that requires evenly spaced dados, consider our indexing dado jig. I'm Dan Carey with Rockler and Woodworkers Journal. Thanks for watching.